My name is Leah, and I'm on the middle school team here at Calvary. Thanks for joining us today, this morning, at night, whenever you're watching this during small group. If you didn't see last week's video, we had a guest appearance, baby Rayleigh, Frank's baby. And since I don't have babies, I thought I'll bring my plant babies. So this is my newest plant baby. It's a bird of paradise, if you were curious. I know you all were wondering. I love houseplants. If you didn't know that, I have probably like 30 at this point. And they just keep growing, and I love them so much because I don't have children. So anyways, this is my plant baby. Thought I'd bring it in. But we are going to jump into week 5 of Big Picture, and we've been talking about the life of Jesus. This is actually our last week in the series, and if you have been wondering, hopefully you know at this point, why we've been calling it Big Picture is because sometimes in life, it's really hard to see what God is doing in the midst of things, especially when life is crazy, especially when things are hard, especially during quarantine. It's hard to see the bigger picture of what God is going to use all of this mess for. And so we wanted to jump into the life of Joseph because we just really felt like his life reflected a lot of those principles of he experienced trial after trial after trial. And there were so many moments where he probably wondered and said, God, what are you doing? What are you doing in the midst of it? And so we just wanted to dive in, and we feel like that's a theme in our lives during COVID. And so just see what we can learn from Joseph. So before we jump into his story, I have a question. Have any of you ever tried to get payback on someone? Like literally anyone. Maybe a younger sibling, especially those of you who are home all the time, stole, I don't even know, a food, something in your room is just messing it up. Maybe a friend who spread a rumor about you and you're not in person, so it makes it even harder. Maybe someone has pranked you once before, hopefully not in your small group. I don't know. Anyways, raise your hand right now if you're in your Zoom call, if you have ever received payback or you tried to get payback on someone. Okay, yes, okay. We all know that we're in this mix. So I went to Liberty University, and there they had 2 dorms, one for guys, one for girls, and they had these drop ceilings. So you know the ceilings that you can like put things in? Well, that's what the ceilings were, and the dorm that I was in. So our dorm had a prank against this guy dorm, prank war going on. I do not recommend any of this, so please don't do this, especially you college students who are about to leave. Please don't do this. Anyways, it escalated to the point where, eggs were thrown at different people's dorms. People were getting caught with like buckets of water over their head as they were heading to class. Like not good things, especially in a backpack full of electronics. But anyways, the ultimate prank came when the boys finally were like, we are getting payback on the girls. And so what they did is they went to the store and they bought fish that were dead that you'd cook with that were pretty large, and they put them into the drop ceiling of the girls' dorm. So a little thing about drop ceiling is even though there's individual rooms, technically speaking, like if you look into the ceiling, it's all one ceiling or it's all one connected. So when they put the fish into the ceiling, it wasn't just one room that was now going to smell as a rotting fish was sitting up there. It was going to be the whole floor. And so all 30 rooms or whatever is on a floor. And as you can imagine, as the fish was not refrigerated in the ceiling, it started to smell. And dead, dying fish is like the worst thing in the world. And so that was the prank that ended all pranked, but that was a payback that people did to get back out. And so some of your stories of payback may not be like mine, but I bet you that you can relate in somehow. And how do I know this? Because in big or small ways, we've all been wronged at some point. We've all been hurt. We've all been frustrated at someone, at something, and we've all done something we've all had someone or something do something to us or just treat us in a way that makes us want only one thing, and that's payback. We want the other person just to experience the same pain that they made us experience, the same frustration, the same embarrassment that we had. It's like, you hurt me, now I just want to hurt you. And so we're going to talk about quickly 3 types of payback. So one of them is public payback. And maybe this is something that you do very openly, very directly to someone who's wronged us. Maybe it's confronting them in a hallway with a big fight, tagging them in a nasty post on social media, or trying to embarrass them in front of someone else. I know I have done those things before. Not proud of them, but I have done them. And this is the kind of payback, public payback, that's really hard to recognize. It's the kind of payback where the world gets to see it and where it's what we want it to be, right? Sometimes payback is more passive. Maybe it's a little less obvious what we're doing. It's kind of more sneaky, behind their back, spreading a rumor about them. Or maybe you just casually, without saying anything, you just move tables, or just simply rolling your eyes at them when they walk away, right? That person might not feel directly the consequences. They might not directly feel how you are feeling about it, but you're still kind of getting payback in a subtle way. Or maybe for you, payback is just in your head. Like, you think through scenarios of things that you want to do or things you could have done to embarrass them, to hurt them, to get back at them. And maybe at some points it consumes you, thinking about what you could do to get them back. Now, I know it sounds harsh, but we're all friends here, right? So we can be honest with each other and admit that maybe we've all felt that way a time or two. And maybe there's just something about payback that feels so fair to us. Because I know I've been in those situations where I'm like, no, they hurt me, I get to hurt them. Like, this is only fair. And just because it feels fair doesn't mean that it is fair, right? Just because we feel something doesn't mean it's always truth. And to be honest, payback isn't always what's best for us. In fact, I really think there's a better approach to payback. And if we lay that down, how much God can actually use it. So if there's anyone in the Bible who had a reason for wanting payback, Joseph would be one of those people, right? Our guy that we've been talking about. And his story is just literally full of people betraying him, hurting him, literally selling him into slavery, causing him years and years of suffering that he simply didn't deserve. So kind of to recap, Joseph had crazy family dynamics. I mean, literally crazy. He was one of 12 boys, if not more, probably more, and his dad loved him the most. Think about that for a moment. You're in the midst of a lot of kids, and everyone knows that you are dad's favorite. I can only imagine the jealousy that ensued. And so they were mad at him. They were jealous. And so one day they decided to throw him in a well, and from there they sold him into slavery, and they literally went home and told their parents, Joseph? Yeah, where is he? Yeah, he died. He died. And they knew that they had sold him off to other people. And so Joseph got a job working for Potiphar. Not a job, he was a slave to him, I guess. He was working for Potiphar, and he was seen to be a really upstanding and really great guy. And so he kind of worked up the ranks, and he was number 2, right under. So it's Potiphar and then him, and he was in charge. Potiphar's wife tried to make a move on him. We talked about that in week 3, and tried to seduce him, and he fled. He fled from all temptation. He ran away. He's like, nope, this isn't right. And when he did that, he landed in prison because Potiphar's wife twisted the story and made it all his fault. So he's in prison for several years that Frank talked about last week. And he eventually gets released, and he gets promoted to work for Pharaoh, which is pretty cool. And so I can imagine during those years, especially when he was in prison, he was just thinking about payback, thinking about how he could get back at his brothers for selling him, for throwing him to the well. That kind of was a trickle effect to everything else that happened in his life. I'm sure he imagined it. And so we're going to pick up at Joseph's story and find out what he did. So Joseph, once he was released from prison, he was elevated to second in command. So it's literally Pharaoh and then him. And he, because of his leadership, because of his character, because of the way he carried himself, those are all things that were seen, and he was seen as this upstanding, amazing leader. And so Pharaoh's like, we need to put him in charge. And so at the time, there's intense famine in the land. People, so much so that people started traveling to Egypt because Joseph, through God, had saved up all this food and storehouse food so that during the famine, they wouldn't all starve and die. And so people were traveling to buy food because Egypt was known for the only ones with food. And part of that was God's plan and using Joseph. That we didn't get into those details, but those are super cool if you want to look into it. Anyway, so Joseph, imagine, is sitting there. He's determining who gets food, who gets payment for it, and who shows up asking for food. None other than his brothers. So what are the chances? Literally, he's standing there, sitting there, second in command in all the land, and all the people come, and it's his brothers are there asking for food for his family, and they're starving. And this could have been the perfect moment for payback, like looking into the faces of the people who betrayed him, who sold him into slavery, who took him away from his family, and everything that happened to him, and he's looking at them. But what does he do? We're going to take a look in Genesis 45, 1 through 5. He says, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself before the attendants and cried out, 'Everyone, leave my presence.' So he's standing there in front of them. He says, 'Leave.' So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians in the other room, they heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still living?' But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were so terrified in his presence." Imagine that. His brothers realizing second in command is Joseph, and we sold you. We thought you had died. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there had been a famine in the land, and the next 5 there'll be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God." And later on he says, "You shall live," he's telling them, "you shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, everything you have, and I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." And so he told them, like, hey, I'm going to provide for you. Even though you threw me away, I'm going to provide for you. And so Joseph, he could have let them starve. He could have thrown them in prison. He could have even had them killed. He literally could have done anything. He's second in command. But instead, he took a different path, and he chose forgiveness. Because when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. What is forgiveness? Jason talked about this a few weeks ago when he was preaching, but it's no need for a payment anymore. It's no longer holding the wrong thing over that person's head. It's releasing them from their wrongdoing. Because, see, why did Joseph choose to forgive? Because he knew that ultimately God had forgiven Joseph for so much when he didn't deserve it. And when he didn't have to, when God didn't have to forgive him. And God still calls us to forgive because we have been forgiven by him. And see, Joseph's response to his brother gives him a powerful example, gives us such a powerful example of how God wants us to deal with people who have wronged us. I want you to think about it this way. If you're in a relationship with another person, a parent, a friend, a sibling, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, neighbor, there's something that connects the two of you, right? And there's a bridge. And when someone hurts or someone wrongs you, that bridge is suddenly broken. It becomes shaky and the connection between the two of you gets damaged. And so what happens is you're left with one choice. You can either burn the bridge, breaking it down completely by paying back wrong for hurt, right? Tit for tat. Or you can rebuild the bridge, reestablishing your connection of friendship, grace, and peace. Right? And of course, I'm not saying that you rebuild bridges with people who continually hurt you over and over and over and repeatedly, right? Sometimes the best way to actually choose forgiveness is to let some healthy boundaries or to talk about the wrongs done to you with someone else that can help. So I'm not saying that we do this in all situations. So please hear me. And if you're wrestling with, like, is this a situation in which I choose to forgive? Like, please talk to myself, talk to your small group leader, a mom, dad. They're a great person to start. But when it's possible, it's our job to lay down our right for payback and choose to forgive. And see, Joseph, he had a choice. He could have made a choice to prove a point. He could have fought to be right. He could have chosen to not help his brothers, and he could have burned the bridges between them. But instead, he chose to forgive because he knew that God had forgiven him. And that forgiveness changed everything. See, when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. But here's the thing, guys. It's not that easy. Like, it's not that easy to just forgive someone because it's not always natural for me to forgive. When someone hurts me, I want to hurt them back. When someone frustrates me or embarrasses me, I want to do it right back at them. And see, sometimes forgiveness doesn't always seem fair. And it can be really, really hard. But if we are followers of Jesus, he calls us to forgive because we have been so forgiven. See, we forgive because we are forgiven. We forgive because we are forgiven. So how do we do it? What are some ways that we can forgive people? Especially, I don't know about you, but in quarantine, people get on my nerves all the time. People are way more frustrating. Things happening, I feel like I need to extend and ask for forgiveness all the time, even more so. Because I'm not always in a great attitude. I'm not always have the best words, not always the best thoughts, not always the best actions. So how do we do it? How do we start to forgive? We'll start small. Start practicing extending things like grace and forgiveness and peace to others in small ways. Sometimes it's the small steps lead us to big places. See, when a friend teases you or hurts your feelings, or maybe when a sibling really annoys you or embarrasses you or blames you for something you didn't do, when your parents snap at you for something that wasn't your fault, practice choosing forgiveness rather than responding with payback. And the more you do this in small, everyday things, the easier it'll get when it comes to the bigger things when they come your way. Forgive first. Think about your own life for a second. Who have you wronged recently? You don't have to wait for them to apologize to forgive. You don't need to wait for them to make the first move and say sorry. The beauty of forgiveness is that you can do it right now on your own, whether they've asked you or not. And you can make a move to forgive first so that you can move on. So start small, forgive first, and pursue forgiveness. See, we can't always control the way people treat us. We can only control the way we treat them. You are only in control of your actions. And the way you respond to them after they did something wrong to you speaks wonders, not only into who you are, but ultimately points to who God is. So we can pursue forgiveness. What would it look like for you to forgive someone who wronged you or hurt you this week? Maybe it's an outward step. It's starting a conversation, or inviting them to sit with you or talk with you again, or unblocking them on social media. Or maybe it's more of an inward step, a prayer that you pray in your heart, or a choice you choose not to say rude things, or a conversation with your small group leader to help you. Whatever it is, take one step this week to pursue forgiveness rather than payback in your relationships. And of course, right, forgiveness isn't easy. But the good news is we have a God who is the best at forgiving, and we can ask him to forgive us because he has forgiven us for so much, and he doesn't have to. And so he calls us to be an example and to pour out forgiveness into other people. Because remember, when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. See, Joseph's life had so many twists and turns, and when we look at one instance, it's really hard to see where God is in the midst of it. And I don't know about you, but it's kind of a lot like life right now, right? If I look at this, it's so long. Oftentimes in our life, we just look at this and we look at the one point. And it's hard to see, right, in quarantine. God, what are you doing with this one point? But what's cool is God actually sees the whole bigger story. And he can see so much that's to come, and he can see so much that has happened. But our lives are often just one point on a giant trail. And so we often don't get the picture of looking at the bigger picture of what's happening. We just sometimes are looking at the one thing. And so something that we hope that we can take away from Joseph's story, that even when we can't see the bigger picture of what he's doing, we can see that God is working in our lives in ways that we can't even imagine. And we have to keep trusting. We have to keep believing. We have to keep making the next right choice. Because for Joseph, eventually, years later, it all made sense. Things were made right, and he finally saw the bigger picture. And we can look in Joseph's life and see what God did over from a bird's eye view. But I'm sure Joseph, in the midst of those feelings and those days and days and days of being in prison, those days of hours being in the well and not knowing what God was doing, he just had to keep trusting. And the same can be for our lives. The same can be for us. That God, even in the midst of quarantine and COVID, is working this beautiful picture that we can't even see or imagine. But we have to trust, we have to believe, and keep making the right next choice. So, as we close our conversation today about Joseph and how he forgave his brothers, I want you to think about this. Who do you need to forgive? Or who do you need to ask forgiveness from? See you guys.